and justice. Theodicy is the attempt to reconcile belief in a loving and powerful God with the suffering present in our world. I've spent much of the last 25 years in ministry, helping people wrestle with these questions. I've done this by inviting them to question the assumptions they held about God and God's work in the world, and by helping them to see how the biblical authors and leading characters of the Bible wrestled with and ultimately answered these questions. In this chapter, I'd like to invite you into a conversation about these issues. I don't propose that in these few pages we will completely resolve the issue, but my hope is to give you a bit of help as you seek to answer the questions for yourself. Then, in the following chapters, we'll consider questions related to unanswered prayer, questions related to God's will, and finally, God's ultimate triumph over evil and suffering. The Bible and suffering. Our disappointment with God in the face of suffering or tragedy or injustice typically stems from our assumptions about how God is supposed to work in our world. When God does not meet our expectations, we are disappointed, disillusioned, and confused. I'd like to invite you to challenge two commonly held but misguided assumptions before we attempt to reconcile God's goodness with suffering. Among the assumptions I once held was that the Bible teaches that if I believe in God and try to be a good person, God will take care of me and bless me, and nothing bad will happen to me. Because this is what I thought the Bible taught, every time something bad happened in my life, my parents divorced, our house burned down, 2 of my best friends were killed in an accident, I was left wondering if I was being punished by God because I had been bad, or if I simply did not have enough faith in God, or if, perhaps, there really was no God after all. As I began to actually read the Bible, I found that my assumptions about what the Bible taught were wrong. The sweeping message of the Bible is not a promise that those who believe and do good will not suffer. Instead, the Bible is largely a book about people who refused to let go of their faith in the face of suffering. Consider a few of the major stories of suffering in the Old Testament. Joseph, the son of Jacob, is sold into slavery by his brothers. The Israelites spend 400 years oppressed by the Egyptians. Moses does God's work and yet is so miserable at times he prays for God to kill him. Saul spends years attempting to kill the young David, during which time David writes many of the Bible's complaint psalms. The entire epic poem of Job is about a good man who suffers terribly, yet refuses to give up his faith. The prophets, too, include their share of complaints about God in the face of their own suffering or the suffering of Israel. The Book of Lamentations is written after the destruction of Jerusalem, when the Babylonian army takes the city's inhabitants into exile. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into a fiery furnace, and Daniel is thrown into a den of lions. Yet through all of this, the Old Testament is the story of people who, in the face of their suffering, can claim with the writer of the 73rd Psalm, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. I have made the Lord God my refuge." Verses 26 and 28. At the center of the New Testament is the story of a man who is beaten and abused and finally nailed to a cross. His first disciples are nearly all put to death for their faith. Far from promising a life of bliss to those who believe, he promises that they will face persecution, hardship, and trouble, often because of their faith. And the most prolific writer of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, is arrested, beaten, and abused on numerous occasions, and is ultimately put to death by the Romans. The Bible definitely does not teach that those who follow God will have a life of